Maryland sports fans, there's only one sports book in the great state of Maryland with over 50 years experience booking bets and supporting customers. Betfred Sportsbook at Longshots is now open and is the only sportsbook in Frederick offering cash betting on football, basketball, world soccer, and more. Visit the Betfred Sportsbook at I-270 and MD-85 in Frederick, right next to Longshots off-track betting. Go to betfredsports.com for more information and your chance to win exclusive merchandise. Must be 21 or older. Play responsibly. For help, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everybody, it's Jay Scott. This is The Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope everyone's having a great day as usual. Day filled with rock music and jamming out to some tunes. Today on this episode, we have two special guests from the Shout It Out Loudcast at SIO Loudcast on Twitter. Is that right, guys?
That's correct, Jay. Yes, thank you so much for having us. We appreciate this very much. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Zeus and
Jay.
Tom.
Glad to be here, buddy.
Both,
Yes.
If you haven't had a chance to enjoy their podcast, I suggest you do. It's a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, a lot of great moments. Very enjoyable listen for these guys. I'm glad to have them on. Thanks again for doing this.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Awesome. So we start every podcast off the same way every time we have a new guest. So we got two of you guys here today. We'll start with Zeus. Just like every rock song has a hook that sucks you in, every rock fan has a moment, whether it's a song, a band, an album, or a performance that hooked you on rock and roll. What was it?
Well, again, thanks for having us, Jay. We appreciate it. We have Shout It Out Loudcast, our first introductory episode. We talked about it. And it's funny because I think me and Tom are on the same page in this. And that's the band that we talk about on our podcast. It was Kiss. I'm talking maybe 5, 6 years old, going to my crazy older cousin Mike's house, seeing that Spirit of 76 poster on his wall with Kiss, and Peter Criss has got the bandage over his head, playing the drums. I'm like, what the F is that? And my older cousin's like, oh, this is Kiss. They're crazy. They're awesome. And then, boom, you get hooked. You got Destroyer. You've got Love Gun. All those images, those album covers, and then the music. And then you identify with them. You start in Kiss as a visual band. So that growing up, we're talking about 5, 6, 7-year-old kids. That's your first introduction to rock and roll. And for us, at least for me, I should say, it doesn't get any better. The music was good. Obviously, I didn't really appreciate, other types of music, other types of bands other than Kiss, because that's what I was listening to then. But it was fun. It had a chorus. It was, crazy with the theatrics. They had playing cards. They had Halloween specials. They had Halloween costumes, which I could wear. That was my introduction to rock. It's expanded from there, obviously. But, yeah, for me, it was Kiss. They got me into it right from the start.
And what about you, Tom? Same answer?
Yeah, similar. And I can remember this story seriously like it just happened. So I'm 46 years old, okay? And growing up, I spent my summers up in Maine, and my cousins, they lived there year-round, up at York Beach, up in Maine, up in New England. And my cousins were quite a few years older than me. So it was the summer when I turned 5 years old. And I used to go to my cousin's, my aunt's house, and he had a stack of vinyl, which is funny thinking that it's 2019 and that's still people are crazy about vinyl. And I used to just flip through his stack of vinyl because at that time, everybody knows in the 70s, the artwork was amazing. And I remember seeing covers for Boston, Molly Hatchet, Queen, Frampton, all these bands. And I remember flipping through and I saw the cover of Love Gun, which was released 1 year prior. And I looked at that cover and I looked at my older cousin and I said, what is this? And they said, oh, it's this band Kiss, and I'm like, I didn't even really care about the music at that time. I was just so obsessed with the image. And he said, you know what? Take this record, take it home, listen to it. He was my big cousin. So I was like, oh, this is great. So of course I stared at the covers. I put the music on. I'm 5 years old. The first song on Love Gun, I Stole Your Love, the guitars, the drums, the riff, the craziness. I kept listening to it. And to this day, I have that original 77 Love Gun LP that my cousin gave me when I was 5 years old. I have it downstairs framed, and the rest is, shall we say, history for me. That was it, 5 years old, just like Zeus. That was the beginning of it. And that musical love just expanded all over the place. I grew up with music in my household, all kinds of styles from jazz, big band, classic rock, pop, you name it. And it's just been a never-ending love affair with music since then.
I'm 44. My introduction to Kiss took a bit, but the unique thing is that I was aware of their presence, right? So when I would go to the grocery store with my mom, I would see the Kiss costumes. I would see all that stuff. I didn't know what they sounded like at that time, but I just kind of knew there were these four guys with white faces, and everyone had that unique makeup that each character had. But I didn't know their music. And I remember watching them on Solid Gold. I think it was like 1980, 81 or something like that. And I remember like the Kiss phonograph. And I remember all these things in the toy section that had Kiss on it. But it wasn't until I Love It Loud, the I Love It Loud video, I saw on pre-cable days on a thing called On TV. And On TV was this thing. I don't know if they had it out on the East Coast, but it was this thing that was a box, it was about the size of a shoebox on top of your TV, and it had a channel. And you'd switch it from regular TV, the 5, 6, 7 channels that you had, and you'd flip it over to On TV, and they had movies, and then in between the movies, they had videos. So I remember watching, I think it was Time Bandits, once when I was a kid, or I forget what movie it was. After the credits rolled, they showed I Love It Loud by Kiss, and that was the first time that I actually heard their music. And I remember seeing them on Solid Gold. I think it was they did the song I from the Elder, but I really didn't remember it. It really didn't kind of connect with me. But the I Love It Loud video did, and then my first album I ever bought with my own money was Lick It Up when I was 9 years old, and that was with the Vinnie Vincent, obviously era, and Eric Carr was in the band. I even remember being at the grocery store and sitting in the grocery cart, going to the checkout line. They have that magazine kiosk there. And I remember seeing the People magazine or the Us magazine when they introduced Eric Carr as the Fox. And I remember just those pictures. I'm like, there's something going on with this band again. And what is this? And I still, I'm just 5, 6 years old, and it still didn't connect with me. This is a rock band. Once I got involved and once I heard I Love It Loud, I mean, Kiss growing up was my favorite band. I still remember the T-shirt that my older brother got on the Crazy Nights tour when Ted Nugent opened up for him. And the back of the shirt said, "Life is like sex. The more you put in, the more you get out." And I thought those were words to live by, right? So,
Awesome.
But yeah, I do remember all that. Kiss is a huge part of my childhood. I remember there was a record store outside of Chicago called Rolling Stone Records. I remember going to get Vinnie Vincent and Dana Strum's autograph there when the Invasion album came out. I remember going to get Frehley's Comet when that album came out. All four members, Anton Fig, John Regan, Todd Harworth, of course, Ace Frehley. And I remember, my grandfather taking me to get these autographs, and it was just a kind of special moment because he was the first musician that I knew, as I explained in my first episode, because he played the piano, and every time I would go over there, I'd hear him play. So, but yeah, Kiss has been a huge influence in my life. Been a huge fan. as the later years went on, I did kind of lose interest. I'm not always a fan of what Gene says in the press. I'm not always a fan of what Paul says in the press. But they are Kiss, and they're one of the greatest rock bands of all time. I just a lot of memories listening to their music, from in my youth and into my adulthood.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of us feel. And for us on our podcast, Tom likes to say sometimes that there's so many Kiss podcasts out there, but some of them treat it like it's Meet the Press. And that's not Kiss to us. If you can't see the ridiculousness of some of the stuff they say or do, to me, it's not authentic. You got to laugh at some of the lyrics. You got to laugh at some of the stunts they try to sell. You got to laugh at that stuff. And you can't take Kiss that serious. It's not that serious. Now, can they have serious songs that you can put up with any rock classic? Yeah, I'll put Black Diamond up against any classic rock song and say that's better. But, I'm not going to put a Bang Bang You against Sympathy for the Devil. I mean,
why not?
Yeah, but you get our point. And that's how we approach at least our podcast.
Right.
We try to have fun with it. We try to come up with new ideas. There's a million Kiss podcasts out there. We got to be different. And if we're not talking about something different, just rehashing, yeah, I like Love Gun. You like Love Gun? Yeah, I like Destroyer. Wow, that's nice. It's not interesting. And Kiss is not dull.
No.
All right?
No.
So if you can't keep it interesting with Kiss and coming up with fun and crazy ideas and be real about them, then that's not for us or our listeners, and our listeners get it. So what you're saying is exactly right. You don't like some of the things Paul and Gene say? Well, neither do we. But overall, we love them.
And you don't have to, right? I mean, there's not a law that says you got to like everything your favorite rock star says. You don't have to agree with everything. The one thing I want to do, though, is when I do appear on your podcast, I want to do the topic, if Vinnie Vincent would have stayed in Kiss, what the album Analyze would have been like.
Ooh, okay. All right. That's a good discussion for sure. Absolutely.
Yes, because there is some demos that were recorded during those sessions that, like Back on the Streets and Boys Are Gonna Rock is essentially, the old demo was essentially On the Eighth Day on Lick It Up. So there was a lot of stuff recorded that ended up on the Invasion record that maybe would have ended up on Animalize. So that's one topic I want to talk about with you guys.
Absolutely. You have an open invitation with us.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to kind of piggyback on a little bit what Zeus said with Kiss in general and with our show specifically, it makes it easy because we love the band, and we follow the band, almost since their inception. The ups and downs, the good, the bad, the funny, the ridiculous, the serious, the great. And like on our recent episode when we had the great Chris Jericho, he had a great quote, that referencing what Paul Stanley said and said, it doesn't matter what floor of the Kiss elevator you get off of, as long as you get off on a floor and enjoy yourself. Meaning, some people might think the non-makeup era is their sweet spot. Some people might think that there's nothing other than the original four with the makeup. And we talk about all of that. And one thing that Zeus and I have brought up in the past is that the thing that makes Kiss so interesting is that there's so much to talk about and discuss. Whether it's album reviews, personalities, musicianship, band lineup changes. There's very few bands that you could really exhaust yourself in a discussion, and I think that's what makes us being a fan of them so fun and so exciting. And hopefully we convey that in our podcast as well.
Absolutely, man. Like I said in the beginning, the podcast you guys do is a lot of fun. I find myself laughing. I just, I haven't listened to the latest episode, but the last one I listened to was All Systems Go. Found myself laughing almost constantly. It was great.
Well, that comes with being college buddies with your partner on the podcast. We have the same stupid, immature sense of humor,
right? And
a lot of inside jokes. Some of our listeners are catching on to it. Other people are probably listening to us and go, "What the hell is he saying?" And it's all right, But we try to have fun, and this is done for fun. And I'm sure you feel the same way. You enjoy having your podcast. I don't want it to be work. And Tom says the same thing. If this is work, we're not doing it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I've always loved talking music. I've always loved listening to music. It's been in my blood since I was a young kid. I lived with a rock band in my early 20s. I've had a lot of fun in rock and roll and hanging out with guys bands they opened up with. And always an enjoyable subject, especially when you deal with the stresses throughout the day. You come home, you don't want to do anything too serious, or you want to get away from what you experienced for 8-9 hours at work, that same day. And there's nothing like talking rock music to get your mind off everything.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it any better. Perfectly. Yep.
So you guys have been checking out the last couple of episodes about saving rock and roll and how the rock band is essentially killing rock and roll. The band we just talked about has a member in it, Gene Simmons, the legendary Gene Simmons, who was quoted about 2, maybe 3 years ago as saying rock and roll is dead. Now, there was a huge uproar after he said that. A lot of fellow rock stars came out and said Gene doesn't know what he's talking about. Rock and roll is not dead. I agree with him because I know what he's talking about. Rock and roll is always going to be around, right? Rock and roll is always going to be found in clubs and to listen to enjoy, to see live. There's always going to be rock bands playing. There's always going to be that music. But what he means when he says rock and roll is dead is, like I said a couple episodes ago, rock and roll doesn't have a seat at the table anymore when it comes to marketing demographics. Rock and roll does not have a seat at the table when it's concerned with relevancy. Right now, it's irrelevant, okay? Rock has 14% of the market share worldwide in terms of what people are listening to. The younger generation is not listening to rock and roll. The older generation doesn't want to listen to any new rock and roll. You hear the comments, new rock sucks, new rock this, and that's not true. So I know you guys, I think it was Zeus that told me that he was burning up at the office today when he was hearing like what we were talking about. And I want to get your thoughts. And, you guys, you are the same age as me and we're in our mid-40s. What do you guys see? What do you guys feel about the current state of rock, what's happening and where it's going, and what you've been observing over the last decade or so?
So if I remember correctly, Gene Simmons was saying, rock is dead, and you, the fan, killed it.
He's right.
And what he's talking about is all the Napster stuff. And, when it comes to Gene, I think he's got a point somewhat, but it just comes across so greedy and all about money. And what he's talking about is all that Napster, all that downloading and stealing that, that music and all this Spotify, 1 million Spotify plays and the band gets $2. It's hard for a band to get started. When bands in like his era were getting started, the record company would take care of them. And, they toured to support the album, right? Now they'll throw an album out just so they go out on tour to have something to play. With that changing of the market, there's no, rock it's not competing with the rest. The other part to it is, I remember him specifically saying that, like the grunge era, the Nirvanas and all that stuff, they killed the rock star. That they took away that image of a rock star being flashy and balls and having a personality and being out there to being, like he said, somebody's grandfather, like up there with raggedy clothes and jeans, getting all serious and not to be appreciated, versus the hip hop artist who's flashing money, who's flashing girls, who's flashing out their bling, their cars, fancy lifestyle. And kids are like, yeah, that's what I want to be. He's like, that's the rock star these days. And rock, instead, took itself too serious and lost that ground where the kids where it wasn't cool anymore. Do you want to dress like, Nirvana, or do you want to dress like P. Diddy and be out the clubs and look like $1 million and get 1 million women and be in the movies and be in the videos and doing crazy stuff? And I think that really put a dent into it. And there's been just no real bona fide super group. I have this conversation with Tom all the time. This is another point I wanted to make. Since I say the 90s ended, You tell me, and I agree with Gene, you tell me the band that you think is going to headline the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame after the 90s. That can't miss. Whose album, when it comes out, you run to the store and get. And it's going to be double platinum, triple platinum within the year. I don't know of anybody. That was after the 90s.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there with what you just said. Okay, let's talk about the frontman. Let's talk about the frontman era. We both grew up, all three of us grew up in an era where the frontman was the big deal. You know, the David Lee Roths, the Vince Neils, the Freddie Mercurys. Everybody that was part of that era knew who the frontman was in these rock bands, right? Because you couldn't take your eyes off of them. They were the show for the most part for most bands. However, in my opinion, as the 80s wore on, okay, it became less about the music and more about the image. When you think about some of those bands coming out in the late 80s and then in the early 90s, right? Bands that like you never even heard of. Like you'd open up a magazine at the newsstand or whatever it was, Metal Edge or Circus or Hit Parader, and you'd see pictures of these bands that you never even heard a song of, whether it was like Hurricane Alice or whether it was like, you know, YYZ or whatever. You'd see these pictures and be like, oh, I never heard of these guys and it was different because the radio stations, the rock stations that you were listening to previously were always playing new rock, right? We're always playing the new bands. And it almost became like this big push to just sign everybody that looked pretty, you know, with hairspray and long hair. Forget about what they sounded like. It was a big money grab. So when the grunge era came about, everyone wants to talk about Nirvana killing rock and roll. I think that era has much more to do about killing that era of rock music than the grunge movement did, because I think people just got sick and tired of the cookie cutter bands that were coming out in the early 90s and late 80s that offered nothing new. I mean, when you think about the 80s in general, right? You think about the early period where it was much more raw music. Your Y&Ts, your early Maidens, your Saxons, your early Dokkens, and so on and so forth. And then Motley Crue releases Home Sweet Home. They have that picture on the back of Theater of Pain all glammed up, and then everybody's got the teased hair and the makeup, and everyone's got the power ballad, right? And then as the era went on into the late 80s, early 90s, it just became more and more the same. Nothing, outside of Guns N' Roses, really, and a few other bands, no one was really offering anything different until Nirvana. And I think people got so sick and tired of, you couldn't tell the difference between one band and the other in the end, that it was a refreshing difference. All right, it was a difference in type of style and type of music. It was much more serious. It took me a while to warm up to that era of music. I rejected it when I was in high school. I always liked Soundgarden and like Alice in Chains because they were kind of more heavier. But the Nirvanas, I still can't listen to Nirvana without grinding my teeth. But I do understand why that had to be, because it got so far out of what it was trying to accomplish that there was no other way to bring it back in, right? There was no other way to harness it rather than just completely get rid of it, just completely be done with it. And I think the bands in the music industry at that time should take much more responsibility about killing that era of music instead of blaming, the grunge movement.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're getting into it now, this is a great topic here. So I think we'll get into whether rock is dead. I want to cover that, but in terms of the timeline that you're talking about what may have killed rock, I think it was kind of a perfect storm here with me, because you, like you said, the early 80s, then the mid 80s, then the late 80s, you had the oversaturation of cookie cutter glam bands. Then you had the breakthrough with the grunge bands, and you had the great ones. You had Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, whether or not what you think of them. Then you had some quote unquote alternative rock bands that weren't necessarily grunge, and they kind of ruled those early to mid 90s. You had those Lollapalooza tours that killed it. Bands like Jane's Addiction, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Then as the 90s progressed, what happened then is what you saw in the 80s. Okay, how can I make my money? I can take a detuned, down-tuned guitar. I can make a song with a couple killer, heavy riffs like an Alice in Chains or a Soundgarden, but you're not going to sound the same. And a lot of those bands started to oversaturate the 90s like we had in the 80s. And then not only did that happen, but then right around 2000-ish, give or take, you had the introduction of Napster and streaming music, okay? The whole Napster thing, that went down. Everybody knows the story about, them getting caught, Metallica, et cetera, et cetera. But then that kind of ushered in that new era of, burning CDs, streaming music, whether or not you're going to pay for it. I think everybody remembers not only Napster, but things like LimeWire, all those sites out there. It allowed you to now kind of focus on hits, on singles, on songs that you knew. Okay, we grew up with, I like Motley Crue. I'm going to go get the new album. I don't really know any songs on it, but I'm going to buy it. And holy crap, there are a ton of great songs on here that I would have never discovered if I didn't buy this disc. Okay? So you had that happen. So now kids are like, oh, I can rip any song I like from, whatever band, say Pearl Jam. Okay. You know what? I like Pearl Jam Versus, but 6 of those songs are garbage. So I'm not going to listen to those. I'm going to listen to 3 of these. And then bands, I think, started getting a little hip to the fact that, now we can release CD singles like bands started doing in the 80s with the cassette singles. So I think you saw a confluence of things happening with the style of music, the way music was consumed. And I think that album-oriented thing that we had when we were younger, whether it was with vinyl or CDs, where you'd get the new album from your favorite band and rip it open, read the liner notes, read the lyrics, and listen to it start to finish, and you're like, wow, this is fantastic. Now, music is kind of forced onto you because here's a hit, you're going to like it, let's see if it gets 5 million downloads.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you a lot on that. The only thing I would say, though, is I don't think rock's any different than the other genres in terms of how people absorb it now. Right? I mean, it's a totally different experience in that there is no experience. There's no physical experience with any music right now unless you go out and buy the physical CDs, which I still do. I still buy the physical copy. But the younger generation doesn't have that, right? So they don't appreciate it. It used to be, and I've said this before on many episodes, that you go to the record store on a Friday after you got paid working at the grocery store or wherever you worked, you bought 1 or 2 CDs, you cruised around in the car with your friends, you went and got burgers or hot dogs or whatever, and you just would listen to it. And then you get home, and the next day you'd open up and you'd look at you'd inspect the cover art more, and you'd look at the back cover of it. You'd take out the CD or the cover of it, and you read the liner notes, you read the lyrics. So you digested that album over a week, right? I mean, you'd listen to the album over and over and over again. I mean, I still remember my brother buying Dock and Back for the Attack. And I remember, I don't know how many times I listened to that in his room with him in like a week. And it was such an experience, right? Because it was like, that's what you looked forward to, because music was my world, and it sounds like it was your guys' world too. So every time something new came out of a band that you liked, or a new band that you were looking forward to hearing, or if you saw the video on MTV, you'd go out and buy it, right? Like you said, you wouldn't stream it. You'd go out and purchase the album. The Napster had a huge influence in how we absorb music. And I think, after the Y2K and that era, I want to say 2000 to 2010, I always consider that kind of the lost period of rock and roll, of hard rock, because I don't really know of any great band. I mean, Buck Cherry came out during that era, and there were a couple others, but there was no one really that would like take over rock and roll again during that period. You had a lot of bands like Third Eye Blind, and you had a lot of bands like Smash Mouth, these bands that really didn't stand out. There was no member of the band that was like, like a David Lee Roth, or like a Vince Neil, or like a Rob Halford or whatever. They were all kind of, all right, So there really wasn't a lot of great rock and roll released in that period. And a lot of the stuff that came out Matchbox 20s, all that kind of stuff it really didn't move me, right? It didn't really connect with me. It was kind of bland, probably the best word to put it. It was nothing special. Zeus brought up a point, who's going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame coming out, now with new music and what are the new bands now? Guys, there is a whole ton of new bands coming out. One of the bands that I absolutely love is Rival Sons. And in my opinion, that is the new face of rock and roll. I've seen those guys live twice. They are the real deal. Okay. Jay Buchanan just is incredible live performer. They've got the Sabbath, they've got the blues, they've got the Zeppelin influences, they've got a lot of Free influences with Paul Rogers. They are the real deal. And if I were to choose one band, and if I would probably pick a number 2 with more of a southern rock feel, is Blackberry Smoke. I've seen those guys live several times. They nail it. They're awesome. So those, I think, are the 2 bands that have been around since about 2010. But over the last year to 5 years, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out that I think is awesome. The question is, when are the classic rock bands going to be open to listening to the new music and sharing it with their kids? And when is it going to resonate with the younger generation?
This is such a great discussion. There's so many points made by both of you guys that I'm like, I agree here, I agree there, I disagree here. But I think what I want to jump on is what Tom was saying, and I want to push back a little. I'm not sure. I thought I was hearing that you feel like rock and pop and all of them had the same impact with the downloads and all that. Here's how I look at it. Rock fans were way more into the physical, product.
Yes, I agree.
You bought Iron Maiden, their CD or album, you're looking at it. You're opening it up. You want to know the lyrics. Okay? So when it comes out, a new album, you're not going on and go, what's the single, in downloading a song from the new Iron Maiden album. No one's doing that. They're buying the album. So now are the same fans of Shakira like, oh, I can't wait for her new album? Or are they going to, I like Shakira. Yeah, I hear that song in the club. I'm going to download that. Or, I'm going to stream that. I feel that is more in tune, pop, forgettable. Yeah, put it on my phone and then it's gone. But you're not buying the whole album. So that whole streaming philosophy in that whole now, the way we get our music, I think is catered to the hip hop where it's not the album. It's the
you're
song
right.
and the single
yeah, Zeus,
and what's on the radio.
Zeus,
versus rock where it's always had its history of, that legendary album. You don't buy Pearl Jam to listen to a song or download a song. You download the Pearl Jam album. And, you don't really download it. You want to buy it. And with the LP now making its comeback somewhat, I'm a CD guy just like you. I don't buy anything. I don't download anything. I still have thousands of CDs. For me, now that the album has come back, I think rock is going to get that surge back like you're talking about. And there was this 10-year gap. It's like a professional sports team. When they didn't draft good for like 5 to 6, 7 years, it killed the product. And now they're like, okay, we got to throw our arms up, and now we got to start drafting well and build from the draft. That's what rock seems to be doing because they lost 10 good years of really nothing special coming out. And now you're starting to hear about a lot of good young bands. And I think that was an excellent point that you made about that.
Well, you're absolutely right about the streaming and the downloading. And I don't know if you heard the episode with Chris from 360 Sound blog. He talks about CDs and why manufacturers are slowing down production or lowering production is because the hip hop industry and the pop music genre, not the industry, but the hip hop genre and the pop genre don't make CDs anymore. They don't put out CDs. They just put out a single and their fans download it. So that's why rock is suffering because, like you said, rock and roll is an experience. You need to buy the physical format in order to get the full enjoyment out of it. 100%, absolutely. But because we don't do as rock fans enough to support new music, whether it's new music by existing bands or new bands, okay, we're losing out, okay? We're allowing the hip-hop genre and the pop genre and also the country genre to dictate what is happening in rock and roll, okay? And that's what I mean about rock fans turning their backs on rock and roll. Classic rock is only going to be around for so much. It's only going to be around for probably another decade, right? I mean, you talk about Kiss. They're at the end of the road. I mean, how many more tours is Maiden going to do? How many more tours is Metallica going to do? How many more tours is Aerosmith, AC/DC, whatever, right? The only band at the end of the day in the next 10 years that probably is going to be able to fill a stadium is Foo Fighters, okay? Right? So there's no bands coming up after that with the equal level of popularity. So we're allowing these other genres to dictate what's going to happen to us. And the rock fan hasn't woken up yet to what's going to happen, right? Because I hear it daily. Daily I hear it. New rock sucks. They don't know their instruments like they did before. They're not the Van Halens. They're not the Led Zeppelins. They're not this. They're not that. Guess what, folks? They're not supposed to be, right? They're not supposed to be like Van Halen. They're not supposed to be like Kiss. They're not supposed to be like Zeppelin. They're their own band, and they're kicking ass. I can give you a list of 20, 25 band names, new bands, right off the top of my head. I can give you a list of albums released by artists we all know, new albums that are kick ass. But there's no infrastructure for new music in rock. Like we touched on country on my Twitter page yesterday, right? Why do country fans support new music more so than rock fans? And we got into this, discussion about, oh, it's country pop now and it's not really country. That doesn't mean anything, right? Because country as it is now and as it's evolved is being supported by its fan. New country, whether you think it's country pop, first of all, the people that are chiming in about country don't even listen to country. Most of them don't. They're just making an observation from afar. But whether you want to call it or not, whether you want to talk about how good the music is or not, their fans are still supporting it. And then you get the fan that says, oh, rock fans are more picky. We want more from our artists. Really? You're really going to do that argument? I mean, like we talked about Kiss, right? I mean, Kiss is not a band for rocket scientists, right? I mean, Kiss is a good time rock and roll band. Right. Kiss is a good time rock and roll band. There's no thinking involved when you listen to Kiss. There's no discussion of how they delivered the rhythm or the vocals on it, or how. I mean, you know what? It's Kiss. It kicks ass. It's rock and roll. People shut up and we listen to it, right? There's no elitist attitude when it comes to rock, right? And I get that comment. That's an elitist thought that rock is this entity that is philosophers and experts. No, it's not. Okay, maybe Rush. Okay, maybe Rush, but that's really about it. But my whole point is that there's always an excuse. New rock bands are kicking ass right now. Here's another thing that bothers the shit out of me when I look at the current state of rock. Okay, instead of going on a Friday and Saturday night and going to see a cover band, a band that plays music that is not their own, okay, and instead of you spending $5 to $10 for a cover charge in beers at the bar and listening to people play music that is not their own, go spend $15 and go see a new band. I spent $18 to go see Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown and Temperance Movement, two great bands, right? I spent $14 to go see Dirty Honey during the summer, right? Dirty Honey is this kick-ass band, okay? There are plenty of bands out there that are up and coming that you won't break the bank on to go see, and it's good music and it's a good time, but people want to go spend their $150 to $200 tickets on Kiss or Paul McCartney or Aerosmith or whatever. Guys, once those guys are gone, what are we going to have? What are we going to have? So I get fired up when I talk about this because I absolutely agree with both you guys that, rock and roll is an experience, but are rock fans still experiencing it the way it should be? They're not going to shows, right? They're not going to see the young bands. They're not supporting the young artists. I don't know what it's going to take for them to wake up. I honestly feel, Mike brought this up, KRA Lives 2019 on Twitter, it's time to forget the classic rock bands because I don't know if they're going to change. I don't know if they are. I mean, what do you guys think?
Well, Jay, you bring up a ton of great points here. In terms of new rock music, okay, I'm a fan of new rock, okay? But here's the thing with rock fans or rock music. Right now, it takes a lot of work to be a rock fan because being a rock fan right now is very proactive. You have to seek it out, okay? Being a pop fan, it's very reactive. It's thrown at you, okay? It's thrown at you whether you're playing a video game, whether you're watching a TV commercial, whether you're watching, some kind of award show or anything. Being a rock fan takes a lot of work, okay? It's out there, okay? You just talked about how you know it's out there, and I know it's out there. One of the big things, and I talk about this all the time, and I bring it up to Zeus all the time too. Satellite radio is pretty much the only place where you can get a chance to constantly listen to new bands. If anybody out there has Sirius XM and you're not listening to Octane, you're missing out on an experience with a lot of new bands out there. Okay, some good, maybe some not so good. Okay, but they always have specials on that channel where they, new rock, profiling bands that you maybe have never even heard of. But then getting back to what you said about a band like Rival Sons or Blackberry Smoke, bands like that, those bands are taken off and they're becoming very popular. But again, you have to search out to find them because getting back to one of our points that we brought up previously, those bands aren't really singles-oriented bands. They're album concert bands, which I think is a great thing. But in terms of getting out there to the masses, you go on iTunes or Apple Music as it is now. You go on Spotify, Pandora. Everything you're going to see out there is a singles-oriented band. Now, granted, a lot of these services are going to say, if you like Rival Sons, you may like this band, and that's wonderful. But again, that takes work. That takes a lot of work, and a lot of rock fans, I'm guilty of it sometimes too. My phone is loaded with tons of music, some of it old, some of it new. And I think it's kind of a struggle to get yourself exposed to new rock. You have to take the time and put into it. You have to read up on it. You have to follow the right Twitter pages, the right Facebook pages. If you're on a streaming site, expose yourself to some of those some of the things that allow you to learn about new bands because they're out there. And the bands that you said. There are other great bands too. Some may more popular. The thing about, say even like a band like Greta Van Fleet, some people love them, some people hate them. They're great and they're producing new hard rock, but they're also producing rock that some people may say kind of harkens back to that classic 70s guitar driven rock, which is not a bad thing. It's awesome. It's probably one of my favorite genres of music, but there's also new metal out there too. Again, I keep it's almost like I'm doing a sales pitch for satellite radio, Sirius XM, but that's pretty much the only place where you can, quote unquote, passively experience new music. If you put on liquid metal, you're going to hear new metal bands. You put on Octane, you're going to hear that. Even some of the other channels, like even Ozzy's Boneyard, they'll play new songs from classic bands. But some of the streaming sites, as great as some of those services are, with guiding you towards music that's new, that's similar to what you may already have in your library. Again, it comes down to being a rock fan takes a lot of work. Being a pop fan is very easy. Those bands are very singles oriented. They throw those out there that, they saturate themselves out in media. And a lot of the music, unfortunately, it might be great. You maybe dance to it, tap your feet to it or whatever, have a good time with it, play it at a party. But most of it is kind of disposable and not very memorable. A band that I personally love, and they're not like a Rival Sons, they're not like a Blackberry Smoke, but a band like Chevelle, okay? They've been around since 99. It's now 2019. They're still around. They're never going to sell out arenas. I saw them at a venue that held about 3,000 people. They absolutely tore the roof off. Their music is kind of heavy, a little bit Tool-like, kind of sludgy sometimes, but they sound amazing. And they've been around for 20 years. And I love them But the only way I'm exposed to their new music is by following them on their social media pages and by checking in on the streaming sites. Occasionally, satellite radio may play them. So, I guess in summary, rock is not dead, okay? But you need to put the work in sometimes to find it. If you want to just, put on, your Pandora, your Spotify, that's fine. That's fine. But rock music is not dead. And, as much as we love Gene Simmons, he can kind of go F himself with a quote like that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's why it's important when you do visit these bands' social media pages, whether it's a YouTube page or a Facebook page, it's important for you to like it or subscribe to it, because that's what radio, that's what whatever, when they're choosing a band to perform here, they're looking for demographics that they're going to be able to sell to advertisers. When they see subscribers and people who like the page and it's a high amount, they're going to have a seat at the table. They're going to have interest from record companies or TV shows or whatever. But the bottom line is, we talked about in the last episode, radio brings in still $20 billion worth of advertisement, right? So there's a lot of money still in radio. But there's no infrastructure for rock when it comes to radio. And I want to compare it again to country. Country radio stations, there's one or two in every market. Whenever a new artist comes out, they promote them and they put them into the wheel, right? They keep playing them. Country music has its own television station, CMT, right? Country Music Television. So they have spotlights every week for new artists. And rock doesn't have anything like that. Rock doesn't have a way for a band to climb up the ladder, right? They're pretty much left on their own. And maybe that's a good thing, I don't know, but it's not helping its cause. It's not helping what's going to happen in 20 years. You mentioned Chevelle. There are bands from that era, 99, and on, that have come out and have a sustained level of success and keep performing and keep putting out music. But when Gene Simmons says rock is dead, we all know rock's always going to be around. But the way I look at it is rock going to have any influence or any impact on the generations like we lived through? Right now, the answer is going to be no, unless things change dramatically.
I agree with a lot of that. And again, I think that kind of piggybacks on what I said about how it takes work to be a rock fan.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's not the way that rock music is going to be exposed. You're right. They're not doing a good job the way country music is. And one thing I'll say about country music, I'm a casual fan of country music. My wife is a huge fan of country music. Every summer, Kenny Chesney comes to Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play. We go. We have a great time. Tailgate. Everybody's enjoying themselves right in the middle of the summer. I think the thing that country music has that rock doesn't, and again, I'm generalizing, and forgive me if I'm insulting a portion of your audience, I don't mean to, rock doesn't really have that female audience. And country music does. There's a lot of bands out there. When we go to country shows, Kenny Chesney, I'd probably say it's 70-30, 60-40 female to male, which is great. That's great. You go to a show like Rival Sons, or you go to a show, recently I saw Shinedown, a very, they're not a heavy band, but they're a band that I love. They've been around for, 20 years about. You're going to see majority of guys at that. And if there are women with them, it's maybe because, I took my wife along. She likes some of the Shinedown music. So I think that also contributes to it too, is that the audience, it's a little bit more difficult to saturate the market with rock. So, but you're right. I think country music is kind of cornering that market right now. But the country music sound has evolved a little bit too. I think Zeus may have something to say about that as well.
Yeah. So I probably, between the two of you guys, I'm the biggest country fan. During my college days, I transitioned from the glam metal to grunge. And I also added, that was the Garth Brooks explosion. So I got into country. And I follow the genre up and down. There's a couple things, the difference between country and, rock or hard rock or metal or anything like that stuff. Number one is tradition. Country is all about tradition. Right from the beginning, older artists are revered. and they're always welcoming younger artists. And it's no big deal to see the newest, youngest hit maker go, I want to sing a song with George Strait. And all of a sudden you got the guy that's almost 70 singing a big hit, and he's big on the radio. And the young girl gets a lift by playing with them. They always do that stuff. Young and old, they all mix. They're always doing tradition. Now, I know new country's getting a lot of, backlash. Oh, it's not traditional country. It's different. It's not that. Country always goes through these phases. They went through in the 60s with the Nashville sound. They went through in the 80s. Remember the whole urban cowboy, Eddie Rabbitt, Kenny Rogers, that pop kind of country.
Eddie Rabbitt was my first concert.
Yeah, it was, oh my God, this isn't real and stuff. And then what happened? A guy like Randy Travers comes in, and all of a sudden, oh my God, he's a traditionalist. Then Alan Jackson comes in, and all of a sudden Garth Brooks comes in, Clint Black, Travis Tritt, Patti LaBelle. All of a sudden now you got this huge country boom again. It's cyclical, and they're always rebuilding. Plus, the other big thing about country is they have that Grand Ole Opry, and that is there, and it's there. It's a permanent spot for old and new stars to be made. Where is that for rock? That old Opry, say what you want, that builds country. Like young starlets are still going to Nashville to become a songwriter and to get onto the Opry stage. And they're still given that opportunity. We don't have that. We used to have, in New York City to get onto those legendary clubs and play. And some of them now in LA, still some of those, hard rock clubs are still legendary. They want to play. Kiss just played somewhere. Where did they play? The Rainbow or something? Where did they play?
I think the Whiskey.
And they came back, right? Something like that. Rock has some of that, but not as much. So whereas a young band can say, we just headline this, that's our stepping stone, and people can go to it. But is there one like that that's a central focal point for rock? Not really. So for me, country's going to always be there. That's not going anywhere. That's their genre. That's going to stay. Rock will, like I said earlier, it's getting there. I think they lost 10 years of poor draft choices, and but now they've put their eye on the ball, and they're trying to get build up, and there will be a new generation. But what they really need is those rock stars and bands that are rock stars. We knew who Slash was. We knew who Steven Adler was. Let me ask you, who's the guitarist for Dokken?
George Lynch. Or now, John Levin.
Yeah. No. Who's the guitarist? I say Dokken. The guitarist for Rad.
Warren DeMartini.
Yeah. Okay. We know all those guys. Those guys are rock stars. I know. I don't know if you do. I don't want to put you on the spot. I knew who the drummers were in those bands.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Me too, man.
All the drummers now in most of these bands. They need that rock star to be something, like not just, maybe I'm my goals are too high, but the biggest guy rock star considered now is what, Adam Levine?
Oh God,
right. He's a good-looking guy. He's on The Voice.
Jesus. Please.
Jay, if I can jump in and ask a question of you and Zeus that maybe to kind of pick your brains on a theory here, if you don't mind. Do you think that, like talking about country, do you think that, and I'm not saying that this is true, I'm just kind of speculating, do you think that one of the problems with rock right now is that some of the quote-unquote the old guard of rock and metal, Kiss, Iron Maiden, The Who, The Stones, do you think that those bands are kind of suffocating the ability for young bands to grow and take over? I mean, for example, I have a friend that I work with who The Who is touring. He saw them at Fenway Park in Boston. The Who have been around for 50 years, and that's terrific that they're touring, okay? Kiss, okay? Some people may say that they're dinosaurs, whatever. They're selling out all over the world. Iron Maiden is still doing the tour. This is great that they're still there. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But because those bands are like on people's Mount Rushmores of the greatest of all time in rock and metal, and they are constantly touring and they're constantly appearing everywhere, are they suffocating younger bands? And here's another thing I want to mention that Zeus and I have brought up on our Kiss podcast. Are these younger bands, are these bands like Kiss? We know that they're not doing it, but Iron Maiden, The Who, etc. What happened to the era of iconic bands taking new and upcoming bands on tour with them to expose them to the masses? When my friend saw The Who at Fenway Park, with all due respect, Peter Wolf from the Jay Giles band opened up for him. Okay? Kiss is touring right now. They have a goddamn painter opening up for them, with all due respect to him. When we grew up, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, these huge arena-selling, stadium-selling bands, they took new bands with them, and it exposed that crowd to this new music, and they would be like, holy crap, I didn't really know about this band, but I just saw them play a 45-minute set. I want to hear their music.
Amen. I don't think they're suffocating the new bands, to answer your first part of your question. Okay. But I think it ties into your second part, where I don't see those bands being the catalyst for the younger bands, right? Yep. So, like you said, Kiss has a fucking painter opening up for them right now. A fucking painter, right? And let's be honest. Let's just call truth what it is. The only reason why they got a painter opening up for them because Gene and Paul want to keep the money. They don't want to pay a band. Okay, I mean, I can only imagine what they're paying that painter per show. Maybe $2,000, $2,500 or whatever, or $1,500 maybe.
Yeah, but wait. So Metallica had a comedian.
Yeah,
that was a.
What's that about?
That was a rarity, though.
But yeah.
No, they've had like comedians. When did they open up with bands? I mean,
no, I saw him.
I mean, on our last episode, even Jericho mentioned it. Yep. That's fucking Paul, not Gene. He goes, "That's fucking Paul putting that painter on."
Well, yeah, and
he thought that was an absolute joke. He was right with you.
Yeah.
But Metallica's got paint. Other people have done gimmicks like that.
Right.
They don't want to deal with the bands anymore. They don't.
Well,
exactly.
But here's yeah. So I saw Metallica a few years ago with my son, and they had Avenged Sevenfold and Volbeat open up for him. Right. So newer bands, younger bands. So they do a lot of that. The Jim Brewer thing, I love Jim Brewer, but I didn't know how that was going to work, and I think it was just an experimentation. Plus, I think Jim Brewer is a really good friend of theirs, so I think there was some motivation in that aspect. But that really isn't the norm for Metallica. I mean, I think Metallica right now, I think they did have Greta Van Fleet opening up for them in South America. But you look at the big rumor for next year is Maiden and Priest are going to tour together. The rumor for the opening band is Testament. Why? Why Testament? Testament's not going to help them sell tickets. They don't need Testament to help them sell more tickets. Why not take a band that's in the UK right now, like a Riders Creed or a Massive Wagons? There's so many rock bands in the UK and Europe right now. Why not take one or two of those bands? If they take two of them, have them play a half hour apiece and get them some exposure. The only band that I know of, of the old guard, right, that is doing that right now is Deep Purple. And right now, Deep Purple has Joyous Wolf opening up for them. And Joyous Wolf is one of my favorite new bands right now. They are phenomenal. A band that can merge the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s sound in one and make it sound fresh and modern. If you haven't checked them out, check out their EP, Place and Time. It is incredible. There's bands like Dirty Honey. There's bands like Black Coffee. There's bands like Tyler Bryant. There's so many bands. And you're right, Tom. I don't think bands are suffocating the new ones because I think that popularity that they have and that pull that they have can be turned into a positive, except they're not turning into a positive. Okay, they're not doing anything with it. I don't know why. I mean, Judas Priest took Uriah Heep out on tour with them over the summer. Uriah frickin' Heep, okay, is not going to sell more tickets for Judas Priest. Okay? They're not. I don't know why they're not doing that. Only a few bands are taking new acts out, and I think it's wrong. I don't think it's helping the cause of rock and roll. It's a definite part of the problem.
So, some of the great ways, that that some of these bands are being exposed, it's a positive and a negative. You see these massive 2-3 day rock festivals, like the Download Festival, I think it is, Rocklahoma, things like this, and they're terrific. But the problem is, they're in one location and they last a few days. And, I understand you have, 40, 50, 80 bands, whatever, you're not going to be able to have that touring circus with that. I get that. But, if I know, I mentioned Lollapalooza in the 90s. That was an unbelievable way to see top tier number one bands. But then they'd bring a slew of up and coming unknown or even middling alternative or grunge or punk bands. If metal or hard rock tried to do something like that rather than just, a Rocklahoma that's 3 days long in one location. If somebody, Perry Farrell was an absolute friggin' genius when he created Lollapalooza. Okay. If somebody could come along and do that and have it be a tour instead of just a location or even one of these cruises, which, I'm sure they're fun. But if somebody like a rock version of Perry Farrell could come around and say, hey, look at what Lollapalooza did for alternative rock in the 90s. That was an iconic generational experience that those bands and people like me who went to a ton of them every year had. Wouldn't that be a way that you could travel around the country, around the world, and show off these bands that you're talking about that maybe not everybody knows? And if you wanted to, have a band like, Iron Maiden be the number one draw. But then take along, 10 other bands that maybe nobody ever heard of. Like I said earlier, there are ways for rock to get out there, but they have to work harder at it. And I don't know how hard, that work wants to get done, wants to be put in.
Let me be devil's advocate here. So we talk about those bands and why aren't they bringing us up? I'm gonna say maybe I'm thinking out loud. Maybe a band like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, they're like, well, wait a minute. This is our lifestyle. We've made tons of money. I don't want to deal with the headaches. Just like Kiss doesn't want to deal with Ace Frehley and his drama and shit. Iron Maiden maybe doesn't want to deal with a young band. What are they going to do? What's my crowd going to do? And guess what? Maybe they're friends with Testament people and they want to throw them a bone. Be like, you know what? You guys can make some money. You guys are our buddies. Why don't you come on tour with us? And so they've made their money. They've made their stuff. And they're just like, you know what? I don't want the drama. Let's bring an old buddy of ours. We're the big shots now. We can afford to do that. It's my decision. I don't want to give some young 25-year-old idiots up there that I know nothing about. We're big enough. We don't need to put up with that shit. Let's bring our buddies along. Maybe that's part of the philosophy. But you're right, as far as like the Kiss, in the Painter, that's just fucking awful. And we've said that enough on our podcast. That's just awful. But maybe that's where Iron Maiden and Judas Priest is thinking with Testament, I guess, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if there's any drama with bringing an opening band, though. I mean, like they travel separately. They don't travel together. And I don't know. I think a band like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, who's in the back nine of their career, wants to have maybe part of their legacy is breaking a new band, exposing a new band. I mean, that would be a great cherry on top of their legacy to say, hey, the last couple tours they did, they brought these kick-ass new bands out, and look, 5 years down the road, look where they're at, and they can thank Iron Maiden and Judas Priest for that. I don't know if that, I understand what you're thinking, but I don't know if that really goes into their decision. I think what happens is management teams get with other management teams. They want to put together a package that they think that they can sell. I think when they're putting together a package with Testament, they're underestimating the power of Maiden and Priest. They don't need Testament to sell tickets. You're right. I mean, if you hear Iron Maiden and Judas Priest are coming, you're already going, oh, Testament's playing? Oh, okay. It's like, that's not going to seal the deal on your decision. You're already sold the minute you hear the first two bands, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I don't know.
That's not putting anybody over, like, oh, Testament.
Yeah, like, well, I wasn't going to go, but now that Testament's going to play 45 minutes, I'm going to go see him, That's just not going to happen. But, hey, you know what? Go bring out one of these younger UK bands that are really lighting a fire over there and see what happens. I mean, they brought Ghost out. Maiden brought Ghost out 3 years ago, okay? And, Ghost has been building their audience now for the last several years. why don't they do that again? I don't know who Iron Maiden brought out this last tour. I don't know, on their Legacy tour. I don't know if they toured by themselves or had an opening act, but I just think that needs to happen. I think, the only way to really expose rock fans to new rock music is that opening act. I mean, I had someone make a ridiculous statement on my Twitter page, and I've brought this up several times, and I hope he listens, and I hope he cringes every time he hears me talk about it. He said, I don't go see opening acts because it's a poor waste of my time.
Ooh.
And I'm like,
no.
What a fucking idiot. It's like the band that you are seeing as the headliner was an opener at one time, And I don't know how many bands that I've seen over the years, countless bands that I've seen opening for the headliner, that I became a lifelong fan after seeing them open up for that band.
No, I agree. I mean, and I remember going to concerts in the 80s and especially the 90s and the early 2000s. When you'd buy tickets, obviously this is before the time of the internet. When you got tickets, you were excited. Oh, who's going to open up for Def Leppard? Oh, who's going to open up for Pearl Jam this year? Or whatever. And then you'd be like, oh, like you said with Metallica, oh shit, Avenged Sevenfold, who I love, like they're open for Metallica. That's going to be an awesome night. And Metallica is the old guard of metal, so there could have been a huge crowd of people there that didn't know who Avenged Sevenfold was. But that band's amazing live. So you see that, and it just confuses me. I mean, maybe Zeus, maybe he's a little bit right. Maybe these older bands, they don't want to worry about it. Jay, maybe you're right. Maybe it's it could be the music business in general and management. But I think those classic iconic bands, I think they're missing out. I think not to get melodramatic here, but I think it's kind of their duty to do that, because like you said, Iron Maiden was an opener one time. Kiss was an opener one time. Judas Priest was an opener one time. Be like the big brother to some of these bands and kind of take them on with you.
And how many videos do we have, Tom, and things where you hear Gene Simmons bragging and listing bands that he gave a start to?
Yep.
What happened to that, buddy?
Absolutely.
Where did that go, Gene? When you always started to go, we're proud to say Scorpions, AC/DC, Iron Maiden, Rush, Bon Jovi. He used to name these bands all the time. And then it kind of stopped, about 5 or 6 years ago. Really, they're not doing really much. So
the last time Kiss had a good opener, and it was kind of awkward, we went. It was when Buck Cherry. It was when Buck Cherry up for them. So I like Buck Cherry, but at that time they were still kind of popular at that time. It wasn't like anybody at Kiss was gonna be like, oh, I've never heard of Buck Cherry, but still, it was good to bring them on.
They had Dead Daisies open up for them a couple of years ago too.
Yeah, we saw them in Worcester.
Yeah,
they were awesome.
Oh, they're a great band.
Awesome. Yep, they were excellent.
Yep.
I wonder when Gene's going to talk about the world famous painter that they brought on tour with them in like 5-6 years. We brought the guy with
Paul.
the paints.
That's not Gene. That's all Paul.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's.
I will never forget. When they announced the end of the road tour and everybody was holding their breath for who's going to be the opener. Is it going to be the Ace Frehley band? Is it going to be some kind of Frehley's Comet, Bruce Kulick? Is it going to be something? And then what a thud when we find out it's a painter. What? Yeah.
A lost opportunity. Total lost opportunity.
Absolutely.
So the problem with rock, I think it all starts with the fans. I think it all starts with the want to listen. And I think it all starts with the experience. One of the things, I had Christy on the last episode, and one of the things we talked about was, like you said, Tom, the experience of when you bought a record when you were younger, that physical experience that everyone has that bond. Every rock fan has that bond, right? You can talk to any random rock fan at a show or anything, and the moment we start talking about albums and CDs and how we absorb them, we all have that same bond. Now, the band Tool just released a new album. It was the first CD that got record companies to start rethinking, them killing the CD format, right? Because it was the number one album and the physical sales of the CD were through the roof. And why was that? Because they made the CD packaging unique, something you can't get on Spotify, something you can't get on Pandora. You had to buy the physical copy to experience it. And like vinyl, which is making a comeback, vinyl's making a comeback because of the experience, right? So you mentioned the festivals, these young college kids who, and let's face it, the younger generation, statistics show that they want an experience with what they're doing. So the vinyl albums, the packaging allows them to have that experience. Plus, it's a memorabilia thing too as well. You get the white vinyl, the red vinyl, the green vinyl. They have all these different marketing, ways to market their album, so you buy it. Now, that's got to happen with CDs. I still think CD is the best format digitally. Vinyl, I've said, has a more intimate sound, but there is no better digital sound than a CD. Streaming services pale in comparison to the sound of a CD. So if bands have figured it out, instead of just having the plain cardboard sleeve with the CD in it, okay, that they sell at shows for $10, look at what Tool did. Tool had this great packaging of the CD, and people got off their ass and went to the record store or ordered it through Amazon or ordered it through their website, and they got the physical copy. So if that is a lesson to bands on what it's going to take to bring back that physical connection, because I still think that is the ultimate core to the problems with rock and roll is the lack of physical connection, I think they may be onto something, and I think that might be the trend in the future. Look at what Led Zeppelin did, right? If you want to talk, we were originally going to do a deep cut Led Zeppelin show, but Led Zeppelin with Peter Grant got the record company, Atlantic, and Swan Song later on, to package their albums in a way that were different. Remember the paper bag with the In Through the Outdoor album, the different sleeves for the Presence album, right? So they had all these different ways of packaging it, and that introduced a whole nother avenue of revenue. Now that kind of stopped. Kiss did that too. We all know the Love Gun, and we all know the other things that, with Rock and Roll Over, with the sticker and all that stuff. So they knew what they were doing. That's been lost, and I think Tool has brought that back somewhat, and I think that's going to be a trend moving forward. It almost has to be. I don't think there's an option. It has to be a trend.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the vinyl. So here in New England is a Boston-based store called Newbury Comics.
I've ordered records from there.
They're all. I'm not sure if they've made their way out to where you are, Jay. I don't think they have.
No, but you can order them online. I've ordered some stuff online from them that I couldn't find anywhere.
Okay, they're like in the New England region. They're like the leaders in like the vinyl movement. They push Record Store Day. They push new vinyl releases, promos, et cetera, et cetera. My son, who's 15, we were actually just at Newbury Comics yesterday. We're recording on a Tuesday right now. We were there the other day, and you're right. A lot of these bands are either reissuing albums on vinyl, or they're either doing anniversary editions or special editions. But my son, he's a huge music fan. He primarily is into like hip hop and rap and stuff like that. But he likes Kiss. He likes Metallica. He likes Dokken. He likes Def Leppard. He likes those bands. And when you get somebody like my son who is a consumer of music, and it is like the hip hop, the rap thing, like most kids his age, he goes into Newbury Comics and sees, a Kiss album, a Pearl Jam album, a Dokken album, a Metallica album. He sees this vinyl and, that kind of clicks in his brain. He's like, oh, these bands are out there. This might not be a new product, a new album, but to him, it's a new product. And, I think you were right. I think if some of these bands, newer bands or whatever, if they can kind of get into that vinyl market, because that's where it is right now, whether people want it or like it or not. I say that the hipsters are taking over, but you know what? If some of these people can take advantage of that and get this rock music out there in these record stores that are hard to find, but they're out there, that might be an avenue to kind of expose these kids or maybe not even necessarily kids to the fact that rock music is out there. Maybe you can't find the CD of it, but I'll tell you, a place like Newbury Comics in New England, they have vinyl upon vinyl, and they do their top 10 of the week. They do their new releases. They break it down by category. So it's good to see, and I think maybe that's a way to get to expose to get some of this new rock out there.
I tell you too, the frustrating thing is, as you guys know, I run these polls on my Twitter feed, some of these polls get 1,000 votes, 500 votes, 400 votes, whatever. And it's great, right? People are discussing their favorite song or their favorite band or their favorite album. And I love those discussions. But what's frustrating is when I post the new music for people to check out, it's like crickets. It, barely gets any hits. You look at the analytics of the post and it's less than 2% people engaging in it. That's frustrating because that tells me that they're just kind of, going over it. They're just glossing over it. They're not even clicking on it. And then those are the same people that are glossing over it that say, well, I can't find new rock. I don't know where to find it. Well, you vote in my polls all the time, and sandwiched in between the polls is new music, and you're not doing anything with it. So that excuse
kind of brings back a little bit of what I said earlier about how being a rock fan takes energy, it takes effort. You have to work at it, and unfortunately, what you just said, these people they don't want to work at it.
No.
You're advertising and promoting some new rock, and they're just like, oh no, I don't know who this is, so I'm just gonna wait for round 2 of the Rush tournament, or I'm gonna wait for round 2 of the Rolling Stone whatever, which is great. We love those tournaments and those polls, but that's easy. They can get into a discussion about why La Villa Strangiato is better than YYZ or whatever, but they don't care that you're pushing rival sons because that takes energy and effort, and unfortunately, I think that's the reality of it.
And here's the secret. I only do those polls so people will click on the new music. I'm using those polls to drive traffic for people to be exposed to the new music. And I'm not going to give up. That's what I want to do, right? So whether I get 5 hits, 100 hits, whatever, I'm still going to do the same thing. But that's really the motivation to do the polls is, I love the rock conversation. And I love the, talking, albums and tunes and going down memory lane. But it's really to promote the new music and promote the new bands that are coming out there, And I know in the last episode, we talked about like the new LA Guns record. And there's a new Tom Kiefer record out, These are all great albums and by great artists. And they're not even ready. How many times do you hear, whatever happened to LA Guns? Whatever happened to Tom Kiefer? Well, guess what, people? There's this thing called Google at your fingertips. And you can type in LA Guns and you can type in Tom Kiefer and you can hit enter. And it'll bring up their website, their Facebook page, their Twitter page. And you can reconnect with all those bands. Stop asking the question. You can ask the question on Twitter, on Google. Just Google it. Seriously, quit being a lazy ass. What the fuck?
Yeah. That's funny because it's the same laziness that gives people in the Twitter polls, which I love. See, I love the 7 against 9 of your polls. But in the end, I hate the laziness of it, and it drives me nuts. What's going to win? Satisfaction. What's going to win? Rock and Roll All Night. What's going to win? Tom Sawyer. What's going to win? Take Me All Night. Like, you know what I mean? Like, guys, there's some great deep cuts in there. Go after those. That's what I love reading the comments when people start picking up, how is this a number 11? This should be ranked higher, or things like that. Not the here we go, Strutter versus Detroit Rock City. And that's that kind of laziness. Look into stuff, guys. There's nothing better than finding something new, whether it's a new song by a great band that you didn't even know existed, but you hear people talking about this. You know what? I'm going to go check it out. Same thing with the new band. Oh, Jesus, this guy, I love his opinions because we share a lot of the same likes and a lot of the same bands. He keeps talking about this. Maybe I ought to check it out. Yeah, check it out.
Right.
Most of the times it's free. Just go on YouTube, go play it on Spotify, whatever. You can get it for free. You don't have to buy the CD or go to your friend's dorm room and go, hey, let me borrow that CD from you. It's so easy. You guys are lazy, and it drives me nuts.
I don't know about you guys, but I still get a charge every time I hear new music that's good, right? Like when I remember when I saw Rival Sons for the first time, and I'm at the House of Blues, and Jay Buchanan's singing, and I turn to my friend, and I go, holy fuck, these guys are fucking incredible. Like, I got chills, right? Same thing when I saw Tyler Bryant, open up for Blackstone Cherry. I mean, just jamming and jamming. I mean, he's, just his song and his power. Unbelievable. I've seen the Struts, man. If you have a chance to see the Struts, that is incredible. I mean, Luke Spiller, the singer from the Struts, is the old school frontman. If you look at Nick Reese from Joyous Wolf, okay, he's got a whole James Brown type of thing to him as a frontman, like the way he moves and the way he gets the crowd. You can't take his eyes off of him. That's old school stuff that's, being brought into more modern music, and that's great. But, like you said, man, it's just like, I love that. I just love that charge I get when I hear a new song, from a band I know that's new and it sounds good, or a new band that is kind of undiscovered, that's just coming up through the ranks. And it's like, wow, these guys are fucking phenomenal. Like this, I still get that. And I'm thankful that I haven't lost that. I'm thankful that I haven't lost interest in absorbing new music and wanting to hear it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Podcasts like yours is, one of the good outlets for people to find new music. So keep doing what you're doing, because it leads to people like me, who's kind of an old, stubborn curmudgeon sometimes about newer music and newer style, until I started really listening to podcasts, which my partner over here, Tom, is the one who started getting me into it. So a podcast like yours, Grown Up Rock, and other podcasts like that opened me up to new music, because I kind of believed what Gene was saying. No great bands after the 90s. And there are. I just didn't look for them. But a podcast like yourself, Twitter, the internet, I do the work now, and I do search for them. So keep doing what you're doing, Jay, because it's a service to a lot of people out there.
I appreciate that, Zeus. I do. No, man, the thing that sells it for me is all these bands that are coming of age. If they were in the era 10, 20 years previous to us, or previous to the era now, they'd be huge. Rival Sons would be gigantic. Blackberry Smoke would be gigantic. All these bands would be gigantic. And now, they're largely falling on deaf ears, and we got to change that. That's the mission statement. Keep rock alive.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Anything else, boys?
No, I mean, I think this has been amazing. I think we're all getting our opinions and our thoughts, and you can tell by the three of us that we're extremely passionate about our love for music, especially the rock genre. And I think you can tell by the sound of the three of us that we're extremely passionate about where that genre is right now and what can be done, and how, we got to just keep pushing and doing what you're doing. With your podcast and your social media outlet, and pushing these new bands and getting people to follow them.
We just got to do it, man.
And I wanted to add too, and kind of in closing, one of the things is you have an open invitation, okay, to come on our podcast, Shout It Out Loudcast, and I know one of the topics was the Vinnie Vincent continuing in Kiss. That we brought that up last week. It's funny you said that. That got brought up. Like, imagine if he stayed on, how good they could have been because of his songwriting talent. And I would love to have you on to discuss that and a couple other things about Kiss. And keep doing what you're doing. We love the polls. We love your podcast. And one little tidbit for people to hear is, one thing I want to share is, when you started off and you were talking about, you were doing your polls, obviously people don't know this, but Jay reached out to us and said, I know you guys did your polls last year, and you did we called it the Kiss Makeup Madness Sweet, basically like a March Madness a poll. We did ours, obviously, during the March Basketball Madness. We did it about Kiss. You reached out to us and asked, not that you needed to, and talked to it about us. Of course, we're like, go ahead. It's obvious. No problem. But that level, respect and stuff is something to be commended. And me and Tom both said, oh, that's so cool. And you tagged us in all of that stuff when you talked about Kiss. That's, that's a level of gentlemanship that is much appreciated and much respected. And I want your listeners to know what a great guy you are and what a great podcast you have. And again, for me, and I'm sure Tom agrees with this, we wish you much success.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that too, because Zeus and I did have a conversation about that. How gracious, that was. That again, who are we? That you would come in and say, hey, I want to do a KISS tournament. What do you think? We just thought that was extremely gracious, and like Zeus said, you tagged us in it. The tournament kind of went the way we thought it would go, but we're big fans of your podcast, big fans of your Twitter feed with the polls and the tournaments. We just wish you success, and we're so grateful that you took the time to have us on here.
Well, I love listening to your podcast, guys, and I look at you guys as rock and roll brothers. We're all a rock and roll family, and I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. I didn't want to step on anybody's vibe, so I went ahead and asked you guys just to see if it would have been okay, and you guys were great with your response, and I love that I tagged you guys in on all those polls to kind of keep you guys involved, and I do appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
No, thank you.
Well, hey, guys, once again, Zeus and Tom, they shouted out Loudcast at SIO Loudcast on Twitter. Great pleasure, guys. Awesome having you guys on. I want to come on. You tell me the date to be there on the podcast. I will do it. And you guys have an open invitation to do this again as well.
Yeah, the only thing is, Jay, you're just going to have to dumb it down when you come on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Jay. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Hey, once again, this is Jay Scott. This is the Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for tuning in. We will all talk again soon. Keep rocking and be that rock soldier. Be that rock music fan that you think you are. Take care.
With Progressive's Name Your Price tool, you can find options that fit your budget, because giving you options is the right thing to do.
Oh yeah, like when I hold the door for someone. Sure, it may be weird if I don't time it right, and they're a little too far away, and now they're running, and we're both asking ourselves, is it worth it to run instead of just, letting them open their own door?
But still, it's the right thing to do. So get options based on your needs with Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and third-party insurers. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.